3 years ago, my entire family's life changed forever. Amber was not just a statistic.
In the last week, I've been to a vigil for some of the earlier victims of the abortion ban in Georgia and a press conference here in Raleigh, North Carolina, hosted by Congresswoman Deborah Ross, that featured a spokesperson from Planned Parenthood, several advocacy groups, and Dr. Purikow, a medical doctor here in Raleigh who's seen women come in and out of his emergency room looking for help in life-threatening situations. I also interviewed a Black woman because duh. I typically have a script for these pieces, but I decided to let the passion run with me this time. In Georgia, the vigil I attended was for two young women who are no longer with us because Georgia instituted a 6-week ban, and it takes a while for this data to catch up with real life. So we're just now getting reports of people confirmed to have been impacted directly by these laws and how restrictive and confusing they can be.
We're grateful to be joined by Candi's sister, Taria, and Amber's mother, Shanette, who will share more about their lives and what their loss has meant to them and their families as we gather together here to remember these women.
We come from a family that will do whatever it takes when one of our loved ones is in need. But on August the 19th, 2022, they felt that that was not important. I shut down. I didn't want to have anything to do with anybody because I needed to process this. But then when I found out what really happened, grief turned into a fight.
I shouldn't have to try to break this down in a way that men understand and encourage you to walk a mile in a woman's shoes. If you don't get it by now, you're probably not going to, but the facts should speak for themselves. So I'm going to present them anyway.
Every day I walk into an emergency department that serves as a last line of defense, a place of refuge for people who have nowhere else to go. I care for survivors of violence, for people experiencing homelessness, for immigrants and refugees, for patients who are scared, alone, and often completely failed by every other part of the healthcare system. And increasingly, I'm seeing patients traveling from other states just to access abortion care. I've cared for women who delayed seeking treatment until their condition became life-threatening, not because they didn't want care, but because they were navigating a legal and logistical maze, trying to find a provider, a clinic, or even just safe passage into a state like ours. I've seen patients forced to carry pregnancies they didn't choose, only to return to the ED with life-threatening hemorrhage, infection, or deep psychological trauma.
Imagine this with me. You're a young woman who needs an abortion for medical reasons. You take 2 pills, mifepristone and misoprostol. The abortion is successful, but the fetus tissue still lives inside of you. It hasn't been fully vacated by your body, which is a problem. There's a routine procedure that doctors perform all the time called dilation and curettage, which exists to remove that fetus tissue from a woman's body. The doctors in this case were confused by the changes in the laws and could only act if it was a life-threatening situation. So, when reports were coming back for Amber saying that she was sick, saying that her organs were starting to fail, saying that she was in septic shock, they still didn't know if they could move or not. Hours and hours and hours went by, and by the time the doctors decided to operate, she was dying. Amber died on the operating table. The doctor had to come out and tell their family.
And this one, in particular, like, impacts me because when I was 19 years old, I had an ectopic pregnancy and didn't know. And because my birth control failed. And I was, you're
Wow.
doing all of the right things. You're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. And I was sent home with side pain. And had to go back, and they were like, oh, actually, we need to get you into emergency surgery because if this bursts, you could die. And to go from being everything is fine, I'm on my birth control, I'm living my life normally, I'm doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing, and to have my pain ignored, and then have to override like the institutional trust that you may have to say, okay, well, I know the doctor told me that it's just side pain and I should like drink more water, but like I'm really not feeling well. And there's a lot of people who don't do that. They get that obstacle, they get that pushback, they get that closed door, and they say, well, the doctor knows best. And then they go on their merry way, and we're seeing it happen. We're seeing it play out with women who are losing their lives because they are trusting in these institutions that are supposed to protect us, when in actuality, not only do they not know us, they're going off of intel that was not shaped by us, um, but they have no desire to.
Most doctors don't take the time to step outside of, the clinic and champion any causes, right? They want to do their job to the best of their ability and go home and repeat. What drove you to make these efforts, to make these kind of changes, to make these kind of statements?
So, as somebody who has two daughters, first of all, I think that this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart because it's an assault on women's rights, and it's something that we're seeing young people, potentially having less rights than their parents' generation, and that's a very frustrating thing for us as providers, but also as parents to think about. I think as a emergency medicine provider, something that we all should worry about is if someone is seeking care in a true emergency, like we're talking about today with some of these cases around abortion, and life-threatening care, we should be able to do what we need to do to help people. And if we aren't standing up and advocating for our patients, whether you're an OBGYN, whether you're an emergency provider or anybody else, I think it's who else is going to, right, when it's coming from government. And so we need to have folks who stand alongside our elected leaders to be able to kind of speak to the clinical side of things and how it's maybe not as straightforward as it might seem.
Christian and Alex were actually the ones who were there to find Candace's body when she expired. And no child, no husband should ever have to find their loved one deceased. No sister should have to get a call in the middle of the night or in the early morning to say that your sister has passed away. And Candace was not only a mother, she was a sister, a friend. She was my best friend and like a daughter to me, really. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her.
A 6-week abortion ban is crazy. That window of time is not even sufficient for some women to know whether they're pregnant or not. And that's intentional. They have the data. They know what they're doing. This is a cross section of religion and patriarchy and big government, which is something that I thought Republicans didn't like, forcing its way into the lives of millions of women who did not vote for this shit.
And to lose a child to an unnecessary death because of decisions made by selfish, foolish politicians is a burden that, Shanette, you have borne with such tremendous grace and strength and tenacity.
It's a fact that Republicans are the ones passing these laws. I don't know what y'all want me to say.
Here is the tragic reality that brings us together this morning. President Trump is waging an all-out war on women. Contrary to their hollow promises on the campaign trail, Trump and Republicans in Congress are using the power of the federal government to strip away our rights and our health care. They say they want to leave abortion to the states. But the truth is that they are working hard every day to ban basic care for women.
The government's latest attempts to block people with Medicaid coverage from going to Planned Parenthood for basic reproductive health care, including birth control, cancer screenings, and the treatment for STIs, is abhorrent.
You know, what's super interesting is I wouldn't have a problem with men legislating if they also spent time in the spaces that they are trying to legislate. And I think that is what's missing. What I'm seeing most often is people are going off of what they perceive to be like the problem, and it's completely like a cultural making, and they're not actually spending time in these situations. What would we rather have? Would we rather have a system in place where we are causing the death of people instead of just listening to them? I wouldn't have a problem with men legislating if they cared to actually listen, but you know, that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening, and people are losing their lives for it.
I'm out here in front of the Feminist Center for Reproductive Liberation in Atlanta. They can no longer perform abortions with the same flexibility as they were able to before. If an abortion is necessary in order to prevent a patient's death or substantial physical impairment, we can provide abortion care up until 20 weeks after last menstrual period. The key word there is substantial. Who determines what's substantial or not? You want to leave that up to doctors. In a case where your body might be shutting down, they may decide that they can fall back and let you suffer and send you home with side pain, even though you might be bleeding internally. That procedure I mentioned earlier, dilation and curettage, yeah, it's technically illegal, except for some extreme cases. And again, those cases go back to being in a very compromised physical condition. And that creates a situation where doctors have to make that judgment call themselves. So that story I told y'all earlier about how Amber was allowed to sit there as she got sicker and sicker for 20 hours until doctors finally operated and her heart stopped on the table. Yeah, Candi knew about these complications. She knew about the legal difficulties, as did Amber. But in Candi's case, she already had lupus, hypertension, and other ailments. So she didn't want to wait until it was dire for her to be able to be operated on by a doctor. So she took it in her own hands and chose to stay at home. Just like in Amber's case, she took abortion pills, mifepristone, misoprostol, did what she was supposed to do, but the fetal tissue was not cleared all the way from her body. And this created a situation where Candi was at home without medical supervision and dying. After she took the pills, she was in bed for days, bedridden and moaning in absolute agony. And her husband found her on November 12th, 2022, unresponsive with her 3-year-old in the bed with her. The chain reaction of events that started with conservative politicians making these decisions that lead to an environment where women are so afraid to go to the hospital that they end up trying to do it themselves without doctor supervision and dying was preventable. It didn't have to happen. In case y'all don't know, all of this happened because of the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade that returned it to the states and allowed certain states to decide to pull that support for health care for women, while other states did not. Therefore, our states are a tangled mess of where you can get that support and where you can't, leading to situations where a couple in Texas went to Colorado to get an abortion successfully due to pregnancy complications that could have killed the mother. It's important to note that the number of total abortions has actually increased nationwide a little bit, mostly due to access to telehealth services and better technology since the bans went into place. But that kind of hides the fact that a lot of women cannot access these services at all. They're trapped by these bans in states like Texas.
The obligation that one generation has to another is a core part of living in a society to begin with. So let me say very simply, I want more babies in the United States of America.
There was a study of birth data from 2023, and it all but proves that these abortion bans have significantly affected the number of births in America. Take a wild guess as to which racial groups and which types of women were more heavily impacted by this decision. You got it. Black women and Hispanic women who live furthest from a clinic and didn't have college degrees.
I want more babies.
The lack of a college degree means less financial security, typically, and you usually need that to raise a kid. Last time I checked.
More babies.
Saw someone the other day say they were responding in response to an article that was saying some funding had been pulled that was specifically going to be going towards Black maternal mortality. And the people were saying how it was racist. What about white mothers? And in their mind, they couldn't conceptualize that white mothers were doing all right in this area. They were receiving the care and support that they needed, and you have a group that's not, and they're dying for it. And like that, it blew my mind. There's no desire to close that gap.
3.8% for Hispanic women, 3.2% for Black women, and 2% for white women.
So if I hadn't had the will and, you know, desire or swallowed the fear to go back to the hospital and say, hey, you know, I know that you told me this, something is wrong, I wouldn't be here.
That data hits a little harder when I mention that in these states that banned abortion, the average woman now lives 300 miles from an abortion clinic. Before the ban, it was 50. This shouldn't have to be said because it's common sense, but just to drill the point home, in counties where the distance to the nearest clinic didn't change at all, the birth rate increased by 1%. In counties where that distance to that clinic increased by up to 200 miles, birth rate increased by a whole 5%. Births increased more in Houston, where the nearest clinic is 600 miles away in Kansas, as opposed to cities like El Paso, where the nearest clinic is across the border. And obviously, I live in the South, and if you live here, you're surrounded by more states that have a ban, so it's more difficult for you to travel to somewhere that doesn't. And in case you were picturing these clinics as these peaceful, orderly places where you can wait in line and be seen relatively quickly, that's not the case anymore because of the ban. A lot of these clinics are overrun with appointments. And in cases where women had to wait 2 weeks or more for their appointment, guess who's having more babies? Could you imagine if your doctor's calendar determined whether you were going to have a child or not?
You're walking right into the gates of hell.
As volunteers stand on the front lines to create a safe space for patients, anti-abortion protesters are buying up property around their clinic.
If this environment of fear wasn't so strong, Candi's kids would still have their mother. Same for Amber's son.
I can't imagine if I feel what I feel, if my children feel what they feel, if my grandchildren feel what they feel, if the aunties and uncles and the entire family feel what they feel. What about my grandson, Messiah?
It isn't fair, and I know I sound ridiculous screaming into the void about fairness, but it isn't fair that these people that we're taught to look up to and this system that we're taught to trust abandons the most vulnerable among us when we need them most. I acknowledge my privilege. I acknowledge the fact that this isn't a subject that directly affects me, except it does. Besides the fact that we have women in our lives, they're people. They're people in our community. They're members of our larger community. And if they're impacted in ways that threaten their lives and put their pregnancies at risk, but also put their reproductive health and their general health at risk, then it impacts us too. If there's people watching who doubt the severity of this problem or think that these policies are a good thing, what would you say to them to kind of push them more towards the side of what we would consider reason?
So I think that the numbers support that minorities are going to have disproportionately high rates of morbidity and mortality associated with pregnancy-related care in general. And then you're talking about people who are coming to the emergency department seeking care in a time of need related to their pregnancy, and they may need a medical abortion depending on the situation, to save their own life, potentially. These are things that you shouldn't have to wonder about the legal ramifications of in the moment, right? We have to act very quickly and make decisions based on medical knowledge, but not factoring in how is a politician going to use this in a, or politicize this to get some sort of soundbite or clip or make themselves more prominent. That shouldn't be something, because of the vague language in a lot of these laws, you have to wonder, does this person fit into that gray zone where we're not sure the legality of it? Is someone going to come after me because I treated this person even though I did what was right by the textbook? It might be considered wrong in the eyes of a politician who wants to come after me and now penalize me as a provider, right? And we're seeing more and more of that happening in current climate. So it's a scary place to be when you have kind of vague language, which is intentional, right? They're making it vague intentionally so that they can pick and choose sort of which folks they want to go after or which people they want to, so that there might not be as much of a defense. Whereas prior to all of this, it was a little bit more clarity state to state on what we could and couldn't do. So certainly it's a scary time to think about the slippery slope of taking away emergency care from people who really need it. And I think that anybody who doesn't think this is a big deal or doesn't necessarily know, hasn't been in this experience, like has not had to face these sort of issues themselves, and certainly would not want any of their loved ones to go through this and have to think about politics.
I shouldn't have to say any of this, but it is necessary. This is real life. It's happening, and the best thing we can do is address it head on and do our best to prevent it from happening to anyone else in subsequent generations. Hopefully somebody sees this who's directly impacted or knows someone who is directly impacted, and this makes them feel heard. It makes them feel seen. This fight is not over, and it starts with us. We got midterms, we got the next election, and beyond. It's always beyond, because the fight never ends. What can we do about this? We can join the fight. We can spread the information. We can make sure that we're hearing women out, that we're supporting women in any way we can, and that when there's an opportunity to speak up or to take action on measures that are threatening to overturn these rights, or take positive action on anything that's going to restore these rights in a state where it's been banned, it's on us to step up. For every woman who's confused and lost and feels like they're alone and doesn't know where to go in this sudden situation that they never thought they'd find themselves in, I see you. I'm here for you. And I just want you to know that there's millions of people just like me who have your back. And we're going to make it through this together. Y'all got the information now. Can't say I ain't tell you.
For one, I'd like to first put forward, we're all glad you're here. I'm very glad that you're still with us, and just the fact that you almost weren't is a really sobering thought. And I've met many women and talked to many women who feel the same way, that there were so many close calls and their pain being ignored.
My partner has rights everywhere, but my rights vary by state. That's frightening. That's insanely frightening.